Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Talking Deals with David. As all of you know, I've been posting about it. We're going to have a really fun and I think interesting discussion around negotiations, but not necessarily limited to sort of the big deals that Darina and I work on in the M&A space. But I think you're going to find that there's a lot of great lessons from Lucia's new book that I've been posting about and we've been sort of talking about on LinkedIn that are terrific if you are an M&A lawyer or if you do other corporate transactional work or you just want to learn, Lucia, as you say, everyday negotiating strategies that you can use in your life. So Lucia, Darina, it's really great to have you join me for this, what I think will be a great episode.
Thank you, David. And good morning from San Francisco. It's still morning here.
That's right, it is. Hi, Darina.
Hello.
Hi. Well, Darina, just to put some context on it, you and I have worked together for a few years doing M&A deals and working on all kinds of corporate transactions, mostly in the M&A space, but in other areas. And so I thought it would be terrific to get your perspective of Lucia's book, but also talk a little bit about what it's like in terms of your thinking around learning negotiating skills, becoming a better, more powerful, more effective negotiator. So I thought, Darina, how did you get into M&A and what has been your experience with negotiations? Have you approached it sort of intentionally, seeking things out like Lucia's book, or just kind of learned, as a lot of us do, as you're doing deals and observing other people negotiate deals?
I think I have a little bit of an advantage here just because of my background. I'm Eastern European, so growing up, you got to haggle over a kilo of tomatoes when you go to the grocery store. So a lot of actually negotiation happened when I was younger, and it kind of just rolled with all of my studies in high school and the law profession really just put the emphasis on it. But yeah, I intentionally seek and I read, but I also have just this innate, gift, so to speak, of negotiating. I don't find it embarrassing or offensive, just like Lucia mentioned in her book, that sometimes it's perceived as aggressive, or it can be violent or unpleasant. I don't have that remorse.
Well, that's Lucia, coming to you. That's I think one of the myths that I think your book does a great job of dispelling, but also just generally your writings and teachings and your experience as a lawyer, mediator, law professor, Italian chef, all kinds of things. But in the negotiating world, I think one of the things you tackle is this idea that I think a lot of people still have, that you're just kind of born with it. It's like an innate athletic talent or something like that. You either love negotiations and getting into that, what people perceive, as Darina described, maybe as like a battle of wits. And, it's sort of, I guess, the deal lawyer's equivalent to a trial where you're sort of on the spot. You have to come up with responses, in real time. And a lot of people just shy away from that thinking, that's not for me. I don't have those skills and I really can't develop them. Your book tackles that. And I think it's really awesome that you did that in such an effective way.
So it is this myth, and I haven't read all of the negotiation books out there, but I've read a whole lot of them. And there's this pattern that I noticed that, these books are written by the attorney that, guilty as charged, the MBA, the C-suite executive, the sales and marketing professional, and the retired FBI hostage negotiator, of course. And they are written for that same audience. And so I went, wait, and they're mostly written by men, by the way. I'm like woman number 6, roughly, in the general marketplace. I'm not talking about something published by the American Bar Association for attorneys. So generally male, very, very male dominated. And I went, time out on the field. What is going on here? No wonder people think that negotiation is some otherworldly skill that, leave this to the professionals, and best don't try this at home, kids. And like I can't do that. That's really specialized stuff, and I can't do it. And not only that, but negotiation is often equated and used synonymously with the word conflict. And I'm here to say, well, okay, if you imagine a pizza, sure, conflict is one slice of that pizza, but it's just one slice. There are other slices in the negotiation pizza, other categories that you're not thinking about. And I have a question for Darina, though. Since you say you've been comfortable negotiating most of your life and you kind of grew up with it, when you got your offer from K&L Gates, did you negotiate it?
So it was between, well, spoiler alert, it was between two firms. And what I got from K&L was actually a great offer, but the other offer was a little more competing. So instead of going to K&L Gates, I negotiated with the recruiter and got my bonus from the recruiter. So I did.
Okay. And when you negotiated it, did you negotiate just your salary, or did you negotiate other terms of the compensation package?
Both, actually.
Okay, great. I love hearing that, because the number one request I get from people is, Lucia, how do I negotiate my salary? And I'm like, okay, time out on the field, sister. First of all, let's change the terminology from salary negotiation to compensation package negotiation, because there's a lot of other factors that it opens your eyes. There are so many other elements that can be negotiated. Salary is a very important one, and might be the most important one. And number two, that's a high stakes negotiation. So if you haven't been practicing your everyday negotiation skills all along, like doing the everyday, crunches, and the planks and the plank twists and working on it every day, then no wonder you feel sort of panicky and nervous that you can't do this one. So you don't jump into the deep end and start with the compensation package negotiation. You start sooner than that, so that when you get to the high stakes deals, maybe it's an M&A deal, maybe it's a marital dissolution, maybe it's a prenup, maybe it's compensation, that you are that much more, have that internalized voice that you're a competent and confident negotiator.
Yeah, it's definitely true. Well, Lucia, before we jumped on, we were talking about that because I think you had expressed, I won't say surprise, but, bemusement perhaps as to why, these M&A lawyers who do deals, kind of for a living and usually pretty significant ones to our clients, this isn't the book, for us, at least that's not how it was directed. But, I was telling you, I actually think it's awesome for M&A lawyers, and I found tons of, interesting little reminders, things I didn't know, ways of approaching. Because at the end of the day, it's easy for us, and I think, Darina, you may have experienced that, to get a little disconnected from the people, because you're advising mostly, corporations and doing deals. But at the end of the day, it's people who make the ultimate decisions, decide strategy, set the tone of how a deal and the negotiations will go. And so you can't get, confused about that. And so the techniques, Lucia, that you teach and that you sort of outline in your book, to me, are equally applicable, whether you're selling the playhouse, like you tell in one of the chapters that you were doing as a 10-year-old, or whether you're doing a, multi-billion-dollar transaction. It's still people, and you still have to have the same, effectiveness as the negotiations, go forward.
Yeah, exactly. It's so widely applicable to everyone every day. I mean, I would say that, honestly, I would go as far as saying that your life may very well center and revolve around negotiation, whether you realize it or not. You are engaged in negotiations every day from the time you wake up. And if you can start recognizing and go, oh, this is a negotiation, right? Then I'm a little bit like the woman with the hammer. So, everything is a negotiation to me. But I do, that's the lens through which I see the world. And that just gets my creative juices going, and my listening skills going, and my curiosity going about, what makes this person tick? Let me find out about them. Because it's not just about making the deal. It's about that deal being practical, durable, wise, and efficient, right? It's about that deal you being able to execute that deal right down the road. And when you're negotiating it, going, how could this thing fall apart in 6 months or a year or 6 years? And then looking out for what you need to put in place for that too. Who is going to be responsible? Is this sturdy, right? So it's not just negotiating a deal, it's negotiating a sturdy deal that is going to stand the test of time, so that you're not going to end up in the conflict category of negotiation, litigating it or something, right?
Yeah. Why do you think, and you touched on a little bit, Darina, you didn't have this, and some of that you think it might have been cultural. It may have been also some of the, innate personality attributes that you have. But Lucia, why do you think that people, including lawyers, don't really relish the idea of a negotiation or bargaining, whatever the terminology that people like to use? And is there research on that? Is it more or less common to have those feelings with women versus men, or is it really, it depends on the person, but that those feelings are somewhat similar in people?
Yeah, so that is a pervasive perspective on negotiation, at least in our culture here in the United States, that negotiation is equated with conflict. And it took me a while to figure this out myself, that, people think negotiation is conflict. And the research does bear that out, that is this attitude that people have about it. And that may be because people don't consciously think about negotiation until they have a problem or a litigation, or they're in some sort of battle and they have to work it out. Well, they're already in the conflict and they have to get some sort of deal. They have to get a deal, right? And so they're not thinking about other types of deals, or except for obvious ones, like a big sale or purchase agreement, like buying a house or something, or some obvious other examples that are negotiations. And as far as the gender divide, the research also bears that out. So women are 4 times less likely to engage in negotiation at all than men. And we are 8 times less likely to enter into a compensation package negotiation. And it is really hurting women in very specific and measurable ways. So I can kind of paint this picture for you of how here's what happens when women who, look, I think this is changing, but generally speaking, and I've done a lot of reading about this, the women are socialized to, cooperate, go along to get along, take care of others, marginalize their needs for others, don't rock the boat, pay it forward. That's a big one, right? So just give and give and give, and sublimate needs and wants for others. And so this is the reason that when a lot of women get their job offer, they go, I'm not going to rock the boat. I'm going to show how cooperative and how appreciative I am for this job by not asking for more, by not being greedy, right? So all these negative connotations with negotiating, when in fact, you've probably just failed your first assignment by not negotiating that offer. So all of this information that we're fed, these perceptions that we are fed, and gets into our emotional mapping and carries us into adulthood, is really doing us a disservice. So here's how this plays out. Let's say you're a college graduate and you have a job offer for $55,000, right? And that, by the way, was the average salary for a college graduate in 2020. So that's actually a little low right now. All right, well, let's go with it. $55,000, right? You and an equally qualified male for the same exact job. You're each offered the $55,000. Well, that man is 8 times more likely to negotiate that offer up 20% to $66,000. But the woman is generally going to say, that's great. I'm so happy. I'm so grateful for this job. Well, if you carry that out for the course of their careers for 38 years, let's say until they're 60, and let's say they're each equally getting the same 3% salary increase per year, which is also unlikely, by the way, because of men have a more propensity to negotiate than women all along. But let's just say they are. Then by the time they are 60, the man is making just over $202,000, and that woman is making just shy of $170,000. So that's a roughly $33,000 difference, which may not seem like it's that much, but remember the man has been making more all along.
It's probably like $500,000 or something, or more, maybe,
more,
right?
It's more, because
over that.
Even if you put it into a 3%, that's it. All he did is put it into a savings account bearing 3%. It actually comes out to just shy $800,000 that he has more after the 38 years. And that's not accounting for, let's say the woman does something crazy and has a baby, because there is a 4% salary or wage penalty per child in the United States for women, and a 6% wage bump per child for men. So you can see how, by avoiding that single negotiation at age 22, the ROI that you're avoiding by avoiding that discomfort, it's costing you easily $1.5 million over the course of your career. I mean, it's stunning, isn't it?
So Lucia, basically though, if people buy this and then use that, it's going to be, so you need to actually price that with some kind of like return based on, a royalty stream coming back to you, because that would give, that would be incredible. But it really does set the stage though, of the importance of thinking about, doing these. And I love the way you describe it in sort of the athletic terms of yoga or getting a 6-pack or whatever it is. You're basically saying you have to, take small steps, but try and do a little bit every day, every week. And you start working that negotiation muscle in a way that, then when the stakes really matter, like Darina, you're getting the job at Kano Gates or you're starting out of college, you don't feel like you're just, how do I do this? You've had a little bit of experience. It sounds like, Darina, you got that experience a little bit with the haggling, which Lucia, you talk about a little bit too, and people being, especially in the US, afraid to haggle at, yard sales or, stores or whatever. But so that's very common. I know it is in Europe generally, but Darina, so you kind of had that experience as a child in terms of just negotiating at markets or whatever things you were buying.
And I also don't think, like, the perception in general, this is a big one. I never perceived negotiation as a conflict, and I don't think why. Other people should perceive it as conflict. You are just like any person. You're trying to find and do what's best for you. So whether you're negotiating that compensation package or you're purchasing something, you're looking out for yourself. So I actually recently helped an engineering graduate negotiate a salary for her. She's a female, and she was working as an intern at that firm. Well, they offered her, I think it was 55, I want to say. And she wanted 72 because that's what other people in her class were getting at other firms. So I advised her, go get competing offers, come back to them, and, ask, make your ask and see where it goes. And she actually was able to get to that number. So I'm glad I did a little bit carry forward to.
Well, and you did a little bit of what she says in the book, right, Lucia, in terms of planning and preparation and thinking, strategically, not just sort of walking in and saying I want 72 because that's what my mortgage payment is. You have to come up with like a plan as to what the market does. In SK Darina, you built a little competition, a little bit of leverage. So that planning and purpose, Lucia, I think you always say is very important, no matter what you're negotiating. You have to think in advance a bit strategically about how best to approach that.
Right. You're thinking in advance, you're planning, you're preparing. And the other advantage of planning and preparing is that when you do find yourself in a situation where you do not have the advantage of planning ahead, because you've been in the habit of planning, you are going to be that much more stealth and quick on your feet and able to adjust quickly. You're going to be that much more agile on your feet to be able to negotiate in that moment. And when you're, for example, when you are negotiating competition, I even tell people, don't just come back with your counteroffer. First, ask some questions. Okay, so first say thank you. Thank you for the offer. I'm really delighted, right? And then, of course, you're going to text your BFF and do a dance of joy, right? And you're going to ask, how did you arrive at that offer? You need to know what factors they thought about when they came up with that number. And that goes for any offer in a business. Where did you come up with that number? How did you arrive at that? What factors went into that? Can you tell me how you calculated that? There's a bunch of ways to ask it, but essentially figure out what went into their calculation, because that's giving you information on you then preparing your counter offer. Maybe there's something they didn't think of. Maybe their data is bad. Maybe you're finding out that it was actually just kind of random, right? So I would say ask questions first, and then when do you need an answer? Okay, so you don't need an answer right away. Find out we need an answer within next week. Great. Then you spend that time preparing your counter offer.
Yeah, it's really terrific, and it's important, something that we do. And we're getting some great questions. Shelby, who, Lucia, you met, and Darina, she helps, her and her sister help me produce these LinkedIn Lives event, because I'm completely technologically inept. And so we would not want me doing any of this stuff. So all the cool banners and fun things, little countdown, that's all, Shelby and Natasha. But Shelby, I'm not going to call you out, well, maybe a little, but she says, negotiation's not, something that she's really comfortable with, not a skill that she's, but I would say actually, as Shelby has sort of been building her, business, doing mostly LinkedIn Center, but doing these kind of events, she negotiated with me over, various things, and came out pretty good. So I would just say that actually, Shelby, I think you are a negotiator, and you did a good job. And if I recall, you kind of laid out some things about what you're doing and, what kind of thing. And so you sort of followed that same model of having a rationale, having a reasonable basis for your ask, and then supporting it. And those are all the basics of negotiation. I think, Lucia, what people don't realize is they're negotiating all the time. And you talk about that. You just don't call it that unless you're sitting in a room, with a bunch of people in a suit, or something like that. And then you say, oh, that's the negotiation. But it's really all the things that lead up to that in your everyday life. That's truly the negotiation.
I mean, who here has kids, right? I talk about how to get your toddler to eat their peas in the book, right? There are a lot of factors in that negotiation that are really fundamental skills. And it's also a great illustration of the difference between power and leverage, which are often used synonymously. They are not the same things. And I love hearing that from you, Shelby, because I often get asked, well, what can I do? Like, what are some things I can do just to get me started? And I always give people the same warm-up exercises, say, and this is in the book, I think it's super tip number 5. I think it's on page 18 or 15 or something like that. It's very early in the book. I say, this is what you're going to do. You're going to start doing. Every time you make a purchase, whether it's in a brick and mortar store or it's online, you're going to use a live chat or an email or whatever you've got at your disposal. And you're going to start asking, are there any other offers or discounts or promotions that apply to my purchase today? Okay, here's what's so great about that. Number one, it's low stakes. You don't lose any face. All right, you're probably going to buy this stuff anyway, so it doesn't really matter what the answer is. So this is like a no risk exercise for people who are really, really averse. And if the answer is no, there aren't any other offers or promotions, that's not necessarily the end of it, right? Are there any coming up? Gosh, it's Father's Day coming up or whatever. There's going to be another one. There's going to be what's next, like Labor Day or something, right? 4th of July, right? How's your inventory on this item? Are there any coming up, right? Now, let's do another sports analogy. Are you going to get a hit every time with that? No, that's not the point of the exercise. But if you think about the best hitters in baseball, okay, like the Hall of Fame guys, their batting averages do not go north of 350, meaning for all the non-baseball people out there, for every 10 at-bats, they are getting a hit no more than 3.5 times. So what's happening the other 6.5 times? Well, they're striking out. They're getting a base on balls. That means a walk. They're flying it out and it's getting caught, but those are the best guys. So if 3.5 times out of 10 and asking that question, you're getting a discount, well, then you're a superstar, right? And even if it's once or twice out of 10 times, you're still doing well. And the larger point is that you are building those six-pack abs. You're building up those muscles. And I have a cute story to share with you in a minute. I don't want to dominate, about a pediatric orthopedic surgeon who read my book and contacted me and told me how using some of the questions in that book, particularly one of the super stealth questions, there are 2 super stealth questions in the book. She said it got one of her patients who refused to wear her back brace to wear her back brace. And she said, I can't believe it. And then she asked me for some other advice about her collegiate athlete, wondering if she could possibly negotiate the what do you call it, scholarship offers that she was getting. And I said, absolutely, she should be negotiating. And she said, I never would have thought to ask that question unless I'd read your book.
I negotiated all of mine.
I was so happy. I was so happy. I'm like, that is why I went to the trouble. All right. Because of this exchange right here that's happening between me and this pediatric orthopedic surgeon and her daughter, the collegiate athlete, who then did negotiate those offers and ended up increasing the offer from her, the number one school she wanted to go to, which was only offering a 10% scholarship. And she ended up with a 70% scholarship.
That's amazing. Well, yeah, it is. Well, Ian Smith is joining us, and he is a terrific negotiator and does tons of M&A deal. I don't think Ian's a lawyer, but he does sort of investment banking type work in his career. But he says negotiation starts with nurturing 2 daughters, now 28 and 31. So I don't think the advice on eating the peas is going to be relevant, Lucia. But he says, which taught me more skills than 40 M&A transactions, which I think is awesome.
Yeah.
And you talk about that in the book, Lucia, a lot about giving children as examples, but also the point I want to talk about, because I think it has so many great lessons, why children are actually masterful negotiators. And most of the reasons why they are things that we can, remember being a child, or at least reintroduce into our life. So maybe you could touch on why children are so great, and maybe some lessons that the children can teach us when we're negotiating.
Okay, well, first, I beg to differ that the how to get your toddler to eat their peas is not applicable to your adult daughters because of the fundamental lessons in the how to get your toddler to eat their peas, which has to do with recognizing power versus leverage, who leverage favors, okay? Because leverage is dynamic, all right? It may start off leveraging one or the other party, and it can change through the course of the negotiation. So recognizing that, and then the how to get your toddler to eat your peas example is also about interests and exploring their interests, your interests. Why do I need them to eat their peas, right? What is this really about? Is this so I can feel like I'm a good parent? Is there something else that could satisfy the peas? Could it be broccoli? Does it have to be green? Could it be cauliflower, right? So the eating your peas example carries through, so many other even really complex negotiation, as does this idea of just plain rapport, right? Just that building of rapport, which is the number one thing I have seen erode since COVID and Zoom meetings and Zoom negotiations and Zoom mediations and just Zoom. People get on the Zoom or whatever video conferencing you're using, and they're like, they got Zoom fatigue or whatever. That's their 4th video call that day. And they're like, let's just get down to what's important. And there's no rapport building at all. And then, 40 minutes into it, you're wondering why you're stuck. Well, it's because you're not even relating to each other as people. You have no idea what is making each other tick. And so people often say, well, the key to rapport and to empathy for that matter. And this is where I think empathy is taught incorrectly, is to treat people the way you want to be treated. And I say wrong. That's wrong. It's treating people the way they want to be treated. Okay. And that may not be the same as how you want to be treated. So I'm someone, for example, I love praise. I love compliments. I'm like that. I'm like the human Labrador, right? Like, give me a pat on the head and a cookie and I'm your best friend forever. I remember working with someone because I love praise. I would always give her compliments, on whatever she was wearing, or she did good a job on something. And finally she just blew up at me one day and she said, "Stop it. It's so embarrassed when you do that." And I said, "Do what?" She's like, "Quit with the compliments." It embarrassed her that I was complimenting her. She did not like being complimented. So it was actually having the opposite effect of building rapport. So don't necessarily assume you know how to build rapport with someone. Find out about them and what makes them tick. And what makes kids such effective negotiators is they are so insatiably curious. They've got that curiosity about people and the world. They ask tons of questions.
Mhm.
They are uninhibited. They are very motivated by what they want and what they need. They are unconcerned with rejection and you saying no. They are persistent. So these are all traits of effective negotiators.
Yeah. Now, Darina, how did hearing that though? How did you had sort of these, innate skills, personalities? You developed some of those as you were growing up. How were you surprised by how deal work is done? How negotiations in the M&A world is done? Have you, developed or evolved your approach to doing deals as you've done more and gained more experience over time?
So my legal specialty is very different from yours. It is employment law. So this is it's really emotional stuff, right? This is people's identity,
Yeah.
it's livelihood, it's their security in life. And a lot of, I was generally negotiating, wrongful termination, sexual harassment, disability accommodation. So they were very, very emotionally charged negotiations, and 80% of employment lawsuits settle. So I was negotiating all of those. I can't say that I have negotiated an M&A deal. So I'm not exactly sure how those differ because
Well, Darina, how about your experience given what you sort of developed over time? How has your approach to deals, evolved, changed? Have you, obviously you've observed other people. We've worked on lots of deals. We've been on, different kinds of transactions. But how do you approach sort of your development as you've been doing more M&A deals?
I think I really like the report part of it. The background, of course, the international background helps. And I've traveled a lot through different countries, different states. I think there probably is maybe one state in the US that I haven't been to. And I have friends in literally so many places, just not in the US, but internationally. And so it's very easy for me to relate to all kinds of people in all kinds of places. Like I can just give an example, David. You and I had this one deal with a firm in Minnesota, and my maid of honor lives there. So I know that in the winter they do skiing. I know in the summer they're always on the lake. They like wakeboarding. So it was really easy for me to build this rapport with the opposing counsel. And I think we were able to slip quite a few things.
Good. That's what I like to hear. Right. That's what I like to hear.
In the deal. But in M&A in general, what I still find sometimes is a struggle is, well, you do have the client, right? And the client is not your, employment type of client. Emotional charge isn't necessarily the key or part of the ingredients that's in here. It's more economic, it's very rational. Sometimes the deal breakers are not what you think are the deal breakers, right, due to other factors you're not aware of. So it's more of, to me, it's like learning more about the client style of negotiation. What are the deal breakers? Where can you give? What can you give? When can you give it? So it's more structured of a negotiation than probably what I started with when.
Although what's interesting, Darina, is that, and I completely, I think that's right. But one thing interesting is most M&A deals actually fail, particularly on the buy side, meaning that if you look at them sort of, 5 years out, let's say, they tend not to achieve the objectives and goals that the parties originally had. And I've always found that interesting. And one of the components of that is dramatically overpaying for an asset, a business. And there's plenty of examples that you can think of just in sort of big companies that have done this. And a lot of it breaks down to these are people who have access to the most, sophisticated modeling, valuation analysis, all that stuff. It comes down a lot of times to CEO hubris, a feeling that I know better than anyone else. I can make, better decisions than other people. It's irrational in some ways. And so a lot of those cognitive biases or neuroscience type based things, Lucia, you touch on that, which I love kind of in the middle of the book, come into play there. Even where you have very sophisticated parties doing things that they're very used to doing, a lot of times, again, it comes down to people making decisions, and often those decisions are not made based on, the rational part of their brain. But I don't know, does that resonate at all, Lucia, with sort of your thinking about that?
Definitely, because rational analysis, as it turns out, only gets you so far. To negotiate fair, efficient, wise, and durable deals, you need to understand some behavioral economics. You need to understand human behavior, and you need to understand human emotions. So even if Darina, I'm hearing both of you sort of say, yeah, M&A deals not so emotional, not like the employment deals, the wrongful termination or harassment or whatever. But those dynamics are still there, because you can come to terms on an M&A deal on paper and in that room that day. Well, but who's carrying out this deal? Who are the actual people who have to put it into motion? It's kind of like Biden going to like the big, world, environmental conference and making these promises as to, how the United States is going to curtail its emissions. And that's great. We want that. That's good. Well, okay. And it comes back to the United States. Well, okay. Who's going to make that happen? Is it what other resources are going to have to take a back seat? Is it going to increase taxes? What tools, what manufacturing, how he's making these promises that are good promises. And then on execution, who are the people and what are the other consequences in the constituencies who need to be involved or who could be impacted by it? So you talk about, say, the personality or the ego of the CEO who's carrying it out. Yes, that's a question that should be asked in any M&A deal. Okay, who are the people who are responsible, who are going to do this? This is what we do in IEPs for special education, right? Is who is it who's going to be carrying out this goal, and how are they going to do it? How is it going to be measured, right? And it gets very specific in terms of accountability. And I would think that should be no different in an M&A deal, and the personalities and the emotions and the motivations involved with the person and people carrying it out, as well as the third parties who aren't in the room, who might be impacted, who might be an audience for that deal, who might represent deal breakers. Because you're right, Darina, the things that you might be deal breakers, that you think are going to be deal breakers, you might be wrong about that. It may be very surprising at what are the deal breakers. And that's where that information gathering and the curiosity and the listening, that deep listening, not just listening to what people are saying, but the why they are saying it, right? The what makes it important to them, and the what they're not saying as well, and all the spaces in between. I mean, the listening part of it is what, and that's why the chapter is titled this, that's what actually makes you the most powerful person in the room.
Yeah, it's so true. And Darina, one thing I was thinking about when Lucia was talking about that in her book, the way deals are done, Lucia, and you don't do M&A, but one thing I've noticed, and you touched on it with the pandemic. And by the way, Darina, you're not like this. So for example, one way that I know when I first met Darina that, she has that, I don't know about love for negotiation, but likes to do that, is you're not afraid or timid to, suggest a call, to suggest, reaching out and, talking through an issue, maybe not even in the context of a formal, this is a negotiation, we're going to try to resolve, but just exploring different things, you're very willing and open to, to do that. What I find, Lucia, and I don't think it, at least I haven't seen it, but obviously not scientific. I think it applies to men and women, associates, lawyers, even partners. What we do in M&A deals often exchange drafts back and forth.
Yeah.
And the pandemic made that even worse. But you'd be surprised how people do not want to discuss issues and instead would prefer just to send back and forth multiple, markups, red lines. Now, again, these are complicated, sometimes 150 page agreement. So there are technical things that have to be, dealt with that you don't want to do on the fly. But you often get to a point where people are just reverting back to language that they had before. And of course, at that point, you realize there's no headway being made of any kind. And I guess that would be in a way a form of impasse, but people are uncomfortable getting on a telephone call, certainly meeting in person, but getting on a telephone call. And yet I've found the most times I've been most successful in any negotiation in the M&A world is when I've had the client, everybody, the key decision makers, as you say, Lucia, whether it's the CEO or CFO, whoever's making the decision, they're with the lawyers. I find it so much easier to read those, subtle signals, maybe even talk without being overly offensive, but talk directly to the client in a way. And it's very hard for the lawyer to interject if the client is sort of nodding, I see what you're saying, I kind of agree with that, versus if you're just with a lawyer-to-lawyer advisor, it's easy to stake out a position and simply just, ping pong, back and forth with no resolution. And I do think that's been missing a lot, even worse, with the pandemic and Zoom and you both, have discussed that. Do you both see that? Is that something, is there a remedy for that? How do we get people more comfortable with interpersonal, communications around negotiations?
Yeah, I have seen it. And I think it contributes to deals falling apart because when you're missing that human flesh and blood element, you're also, in a sense, what you're talking about is sort of reality testing. And it's something mediators do, right? So what's great about working in a mediator is that we are seeing things that you just can't see. Because if you're in the deal, there are some things that you're just not seeing about the deal, but a mediator is seeing things that you're not necessarily seeing. And so we could do some reality testing and sort of go, okay, well, let's just take a very simple example, like in an employment deal where you have a non-monetary item that's really the deal breaker, and it might be an apology or a recommendation, like a positive recommendation for a future job, and they put that in the deal, and there will be, a recommendation. And sort of go, okay, hold on, how would that work? So these are these questions mediators ask. Imagine if, or how would that work, or what if? So I'd say, well, how is that going to work? Who is going to give the recommendation? Is it going to be a voice recommendation, or is it going to be a written recommendation? What elements need to be included in the recommendation? Like, let's play this out. And once you play it out, you start to play it out with the parties, and you find out that they don't actually have agreement, right? Because there are a number of times when I have seen that we've been mediating and the parties say, well, we have a deal. And I'm looking at it, I'm like, I don't think they have a deal. I don't think they do. And so I'll start the reality testing. And I think that is kind of what you're talking about. That if you can sort of that living, breathing human being in front of you gives you that much more information. That it's that interoception, right? Isn't that chapter 4? Mm-hmm. It's your spidey senses, right? It's the information, both conscious and unconscious, inside your body, right? This gets back to rational analysis only gets you so far. Well, it's your spidey senses. If your spidey senses are tingling, please don't ignore those. Please don't go, oh, that's just me not conquering my fears, or, whatever nonsense out there about getting past your fears there is on social media, right? No, listen to your interoception. Your body is feeding you information. Pay attention to it in the right proportions and in the right context with the cognitive information that your mind is feeding you. And I think that is a little easier to do in person. Darina, what do you think?
I completely agree. I think it's so much easier to do it in person, but in terms of how and to what extent we can remedy it, David, I think I've had some situations where negotiations have stalled simply because the other attorney side was not willing to move forward. Their client was actually not aware of their positions that they were taking. And they didn't want to budge off of them. I don't think it was a deal that we worked on, it was a different project. So I think the business teams can really help in M&A on this side, because at some point, even if, we can do what we can do, but having some help on the business side and circling back and confirming what they have heard is correct, and the positions are set, made all the difference for us in that specific deal. So sometimes it's not even the in-person, it's the person you're dealing with.
Oh,
I'm
definitely.
starting to kind of limit my written correspondence. I'll say when it's starting to get to be too much and that's all there is, I'll say, let's get on the phone. We need to talk. And I'll just limit it. I'll say, we've got to get on it. We've got to talk voice to voice. We've got to be in real time.
Yeah, it's definitely true. Well, one of the things that I love about your book, Lucia, is that it doesn't take and again, I know it wasn't written sort of for necessarily a technical audience, but still you cover a lot of technical points, but you do it, of course, in the great storytelling way that, that you do, and that everyone's been able to hear today. But you don't take a doctrinaire approach. There's all these different schools of negotiation. I cited a couple of those just kind of, tangentially in some of the posts, starting with sort of the Fisher kind of getting to yes, cooperative style, and then more, M&A is much more positional, I would say, style of negotiating most of the time. But what I love about your book is, and it's totally true, you don't want to adopt a particular style. I don't think. What I think I try to do is be almost like a chameleon of sorts, or ability to shift as things go. I think it's best to know all of those different approaches, see what may work for you, for your own personal, some things may fit better than others, but also you don't know who's on the other side and what particular school or approach or book or whatever they may have done. And there are some serious adherents to some of these things. And so there are some people in M&A that take a very positional, everything I give or say is something, that you're pulling from me. And that's a much more challenging approach. But I find if you're calm, if you're friendly, if you build that rapport and you're patient, eventually you can't bluster. You can only bluster so long. You can only make so many threats. Eventually that tempers down and you start to do things. Also, I find sometimes these gambits, still work. Like, for example, if you take someone like that and you just indicate you're available all day, all night, however long it takes. I've had the best results in negotiations at 11 p.m. at night, at midnight, at 1 a.m. It's amazing how many concessions you can get if you're just patient and are willing to be friendly and wait.
So urgency is usually manufactured. So if someone is putting pressure on you to make a quick decision, you've probably just gained important information that they are in a hurry.
Yeah, that's definitely true. We use that, Darina, right? That is a part of M&A deals where sometimes there are factors, that you may need to get something done before the market's open, or there's some other government regulatory reason to get a deal done. But being able to respond to time as sort of one of those leverage points, makes a big difference. What have you seen, Darina, in terms of your style of negotiation? That's one thing, Lucia, you talk about a little bit in terms of some different tests that you use at the law school or other places. But what's your approach, Darina? How do you would you characterize your own, style or approach? And do you do like I do, where you try to be, I have my base approach, I know what that is very well, and sometimes it works, but oftentimes it's not so good. But I try to temper that, by using some of these other ones. What do you think about that?
So I am very much a chameleon. I think for me, it all starts with rapport. I want to see who I have in front of me and what they are like, and what is it that it's important to them. What is it that I listened? What is it that they need, they want, what is it that they like to have, and I adjust accordingly. And you also sometimes have people that they don't want to build rapport, they just want to go right into it, and that tells you something too. You adjust accordingly, and you switch gears. So I don't think I'm one of those things. I think I adjust based on who I have in front of me.
That's why you're good at it, probably, because you do have that flexibility. I always thought that, for me, I sort of use perspective and persistence together as sort of, in my own mind, because what I can find sometimes for me is that I'm very persistent, but I can easily lose perspective if I'm not careful. And sometimes, again, that works very well in an M&A deal where you might have, what would you say, Darina? Sometimes hundreds, if not thousands, of potential moving parts. So there's many different levers that you can pull and things you have to keep constantly being sensitive about. So in that sense, they're complex negotiations, but you have to temper that. And persistence is important, making sure you come back to points that you need. You make sure you take the time, Lucia, as you said, to get results that you need, but you have to always be balancing that with perspective, because if you are persistently pushing on minutia or things that don't really matter to anybody, including yourself, then you're off track. But if you have perspective but no persistence, that's not going to get you anywhere either. You have to kind of balance those, and you're always a little off tilt in my mind. But if you can keep trying to balance yourself a little bit better, and I think, Lucia, you had very much, without maybe those exact words, but that kind of approach, I think, which I really loved. It wasn't doctrinaire. It wasn't, pushing this particular approach. It was, let's see what works in different circumstances and almost experiment in a scientific way. Maybe try one thing, see what the reaction is, try something else. Do you like that kind of maybe experimental approach, or maintaining flexibility in how you approach negotiation?
Well, you almost can't avoid it. So yes. And there's only so much you can prepare and learn in advance. So you've got to have that open-minded sort of experimental mindset going into a negotiation, because there are just things you don't know and you need to learn. And as a mediator, mediators don't give up. We never give up on the parties, and neither do special needs parents. And I'm both. So I'm typically someone who just doesn't give up. And it's interesting what you say about persistence and perspective, because I think sometimes when I've negotiated for my son's services and things over the year, it is possible that persistence is, particularly when you're negotiating for your child, that I lost some perspective, because I was just like, nope, not going to give up. Nope, got to keep, I was like a dog with a bone. And again, that gets back to how mediators are so helpful. And understanding, Darina, you talk about being a chameleon. Yes, just that agility to be able to adapt to different personalities, different contexts is very, very stealth. And having that fundamental understanding of your own negotiating style and behaviors. So on the Thomas Kilmann mode instrument, I test co-dominant for cooperative and collaborative and competitive, right? So that means that naturally, I'm going to start off with like the Robert Axelrod, right? Evolution of cooperation. I'm going to cooperate and collaborate with you. And if you defect too many times, well, I'm going to crush you. And you might not see it happen. It might not be obvious.
Right.
So understanding yourself, but then also being able to adapt.
Yeah, well, it's great because, you saw, like, when Getting to Yes came out, and before both of our time, I think, but when that came out, and I wonder if that was a reaction to some of the sort of, time, I think that was in the early 80s, but you can correct me, sometime in that period. But, you basically had that as an approach, but, and there's been a stronger backlash against that. For me, in the M&A world, that approach never made a lot of sense. If you really follow that kind of, approach, you usually get, bad results in my experience. But it's a great framework to then use some of these other approaches. And that's what I like about your book. It really gives you the idea of, you have to work on this and practice. It's a process. It's not some, You don't arrive at some point where you do it. And I think, Darina, like with associates that we work with, starting them on smaller agreements or ancillary pieces or other things, and having them kind of take the reins and negotiate that is something that we should focus more on. I sometimes I try to do that to the extent that I'm thinking about it, but that's an important skill so that they can also develop those muscles and have that little nervousness and anticipation. I'm always quite anxious before any kind of a big call on a negotiation or something, even after doing it a long time. But I think, and I'm a little anxious person generally, but I do think that so that probably contributes to it. But I actually think if you don't have that, you're dead. And I've written about that.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have that, if all you can think of is I've been there, done that, seen that, you're going to get destroyed by somebody who's prepared, who's very diligent, who has a plan, Lucia, as you say, a negotiation approach and a plan laid out. You're going to get destroyed.
Early in my career, very early in my career. So I think I was 27 years old or something. And I walk into this, a law firm partner took me, I was a brand new associate. He takes me to this negotiation at the Longshoremen's Union, right? And I walk into this room, only woman in the room, and I'm surrounded by tough guys with no necks, right? And one of them wonders aloud as I walk in, who invited the secretary of the Lollipop Guild? Okay, referring to me. And I'm also tiny. I'm 110 pounds, right? And these guys are huge. And they all laughed at me. And then they told me to go sit in the corner. So I literally did not have a seat at the table. So I go and I sit in this corner in this chair that is so big, it like swallows me. My feet didn't even touch the floor. All right. So I looked ridiculous. I felt ridiculous. And I had been completely marginalized. However, what they didn't realize is they had actually just put me in the most powerful position in the room. I didn't realize it either. That's not how I was feeling. I wasn't like, ha, ha, ha. I was like, But what happened is I had just been essentially rejected and humiliated. And I used the resources I had at my disposal, which were extremely powerful ones. Listening and observing. And I'm watching these guys, right? And they know everything, right? It's just what you just said, David. Like they know everything, they know all about, right? And they're preening and they're posturing. And I'm listening and I'm like, I don't think that matches with, because I had prepared. This doesn't add up. I'm like, this doesn't add up with this other thing that I saw in these documents, So we get done. We're in the car driving back with his partner. And I said to him, of course, I said all the prefatory things first that women do. Like, well, you probably already thought of this. And I don't know if this makes any sense, but, I had to do that first. And I said, but, I don't think that, and whatever it was that I had noticed, that does not match up with this. The partner pulls the car over. He turns off the ignition. And I'm like, oh, I'm about to get fired for sheer stupidity, right? No, he hadn't noticed it. No one had noticed it but me. And it was something that completely changed the course of the negotiation. Right?
Wow. Yeah, right.
And
Wow.
that is awesome. And that is exactly, because when I was a more junior associate, it was a very similar situation many times. And I think knowing the facts better than anyone has gotten me out of that small chair that you're talking about.
Wow.
You gotta know your facts.
That's terrific.
But what I like about that story too is you've always got something to use, right? They stripped me of just everything, but I still had you had to kind of like MacGyver it, which I know I'm dating that reference, but I think people on this call, I looked at the list. Some people on this call know what I mean when I say MacGyver it. Like, what do you have that you can use? Use it. You've got something.
Yeah, it's so great. Well, Lucia, this is awesome. Just an incredible, book. I love the artwork. I meant to flip it on the back too, because I know you like that. And that's your, I assume that is your
goal. It is. I told
lab.
The art team, I said, incorporating a chocolate Labrador on my book cover is non-negotiable. And then they're like,
that's right.
Yeah, it's just too crowded. And with the Cialdini endorsement on the front, and then the woman, they said, we can't. And I said, here's what you do. You put a coffee mug in her right hand. You put a leash in her left hand. You wrap the leash around the spine and you put him on the back cover.
Let me see. It's all there. Yep. Okay. Well, they did it. It's all there.
It's
Yeah.
not
Well,
negotiable. When I say non-negotiable, I
Yeah.
mean it.
I always just generally ignore that, Lucia, and then just continue moving on with my persistence and see
Good
where
for
I
you.
get. But that does come up a lot. No, this was a fantastic, fun discussion, and I really think for everybody that wants to do this everyday negotiation, or like Darina and I are kind of knee deep in M&A negotiations every day. I loved it, Lucia. I really did. I think it's just so well written, so many great stories, so much interesting science and other things behind it, but in a way that that people actually can enjoy. So I just don't know how you wrote that. I know you wrote it pretty quickly, I think, but so maybe give me just a little taste of that, because it's well written and it's really an incredible book, and I'm so glad that you actually took the time and and wrote it for everybody.
I won't go in the details of this right now, but I was mad. I was mad. And when I get mad, I get busy. And I sat down and I actually wrote it in 4 days, which allegedly Sylvester Stallone wrote the screenplay for Rocky, which holds up. You should watch it.
Right. Oh, it does.
He wrote it in 4 days. And it was the same thing. My poor husband was like, rolled over in the middle of the night in bed, and I was missing. I was gone. He had to work all day and then make dinner, right? There's no dinner. And I was just on a mission. I had all this material, right? I did all this research, all these years of teaching, all this and experience. But I said, but it has to be fun. It has to be fun. It can't just be words, right? I don't know if you remember this scene in Amadeus when the Emperor of Austria comes to his rehearsal for one of his ballets, and he's listening, and the rehearsal's over, and Mozart turns around. He's like, "What do you think?" And the Emperor of Austria says, "Too many notes. Just take some out in the middle." And so I'm like, okay, you can't have too many words, because people don't read these days. Like I read, right? I was a literature major, so I read, but people scroll social media posts. So I'm like, no, it's got to be really reader friendly, easy on the eye. Filled it with my own artwork, my 5th grade level artwork. I have no training in art. I don't care. And the everyday super tip boxes, so that it's like you can pick this up and it is easy on the eyes. It's not too many notes. So it was 4 days, and then I sent it off to Robert Cialdini, and for him to take a look, and he said, "Yeah, I'm going to endorse this." And that was it. Then it was just on its way with the proofreader and the copy editor and the development editor. And that's where the rubber hits the road. Anyone can write a book. That's the easy part. It's getting it to the marketplace. That is what separates the women from the girls, and then getting people to read it.
Well, you do a great job at that, and great doing this. Darina, thank you so much for doing this. I know we're both busy and we've got things going on, so I really appreciate you taking sort of a leap of faith with me doing this. And Lucia, thank you so much for joining us. This is awesome. And again, everybody grab that. It's a fantastic book, and it's just a great read. So thanks so much for taking the time, Lucia. We really appreciate it.
You're most welcome.
Pleasure
It's been a delight. And everyone, please have fun with it. Go out and have fun and be your super selves.
Do it. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Well, hopefully you can join me for the next Talking Deals with David. Thanks very much. Appreciate you joining us. Okay. Bye.